You thought Olivia Benson was Republican? You thought Olivia Benson, who has a picture of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has a I'm still with her mug, who has, like, I'm pretty sure a photo of Barack Obama in her office, was a Republican? Hello. Dun dun. Dun dun. Or clink clink, because some people think it's clink clink noise. But I think because I was doing the Game of Thrones intro for my House of the Dragon videos, I should be doing this intro for my Law and Order SVU video. Hi, my name is Anastasia. I like to make videos about things that I like talking about. That's all. I don't know how to describe it anywhere else. You could find me on these social media accounts. Link down below. Business email down for any inquiries. Before I begin, I want to um, say that I also will be linking this GoFundMe for Waleed and his family. They are victims of genocide and famine who need to be rescued from Gaza. I will read their latest update from August 28th. We are facing unimaginable horrors every day. The bombings haven't stopped, and they live in constant fear with nowhere safe to go. There is a famine unfolding. Food is nearly impossible to find and shockingly expensive. Clean water is a luxury. They are surviving on what little they can find, often unfit to drink. The hospitals are overflowing and barely functioning, leaving many without access to basic care. They are holding on by a thread and they urgently need help. Your donations can provide them with the essentials food, water, and medical supplies to make it through these dark times. Please, if you can, donate and share. Your kindness can save lives. Thank you. So, they have a goal of 68,452 euros, and they so far have raised 14,272 euros. This money will help them like evacuate and get medical care because they have some members of their family have pre-existing conditions. They were trapped in the rubble, so that created injuries, and then also through famine that they're experiencing that has exacerbated the pre-existing conditions and stuff. So this is greatly needed. I will say this again at the end of the video. It's linked down below. I have a photo of the GoFundMe here. If you can at least share it, if not donate, that would be great. Would be great. So moving on to the video. So right after the presidential debates, Mariska Hargitay, who plays the legendary Olivia Benson on Law and Order SVU, posted a photo endorsing her for president. And then the comments were swarmed with so many people literally saying they're going to unfollow her. She lost like 100,000 followers in a day. Comments talking about how disappointed they were. Oh my God. Basically saying they thought she was Republican, or they thought that Olivia Benson was Republican. And to me, and all the other people who have watched the show for years, because it's been on air for 25 years, like, you thought Olivia Benson was Republican? You thought Olivia Benson, who has a picture of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has a I'm still with her mug, who has, like, I'm pretty sure a photo of Barack Obama in her office, was a Republican? And then part of me was like, oh, is it because she like locks up pedophiles? And there's like that fringe of like QAnon people who are like think everybody is in like the Democratic Party is like a pedo. Is that why they were like into it? I don't know. I literally still don't know. But that inspired me to really make this video of like, how are people watching this show confused? Because what is this show's politics when it comes to being a police procedural, and when it comes to like copaganda, and when it comes to how they discuss assault? So let's begin with the show. Law and Order SVU was created in 1998, 99. Yes. Well, it was created in 1998, premiered in 1999 by Dick Wolf. Dick Wolf, legendary TV producer. He created the Law and Order franchise, the Chicago franchise, and other stuff. This is like, I think, the first extension into the Law and Order universe, and he was inspired by the Preppy murders. Initially wanted to have a show called Sex Crimes, but then changed the name to be Law and Order Special Victims Unit to better mirror the actual unit within the New York Police Department. Whereas other shows follow serial killers like Criminal Minds or Law and Order follows homicides and Criminal Intent follows stuff like that. This one is specifically related to sex crimes, so crimes involving assault, involving children, involving the elderly, involving the disabled, things like of that nature, which separates it from the majority of other like police procedurals, because majority of them just focus on murder, or they focus on gangs, or they focus on just other forms of crime. I find this significant because despite, abuse, assault, and things being very common, it's not really talked about. And it being talked about in crime and something that should be taken seriously, the show allows itself to be a platform for advocacy as well as just entertainment, which in a regular crime show, you don't really need to because everyone knows murder is wrong. But in this show, they can really explore more gray area complex things that you wouldn't even really consider. And I think that the show has probably done a really positive way of like changing people's minds about like getting rid of rape myths and stereotypes and what is an ideal victim, what do victims look like. But I also think because the show is a police procedural, it is also propaganda. It has an invested interest in presenting the police in a positive way, presenting opposition to the police in a negative way, and all that stuff. So let's begin with like discussing SVU as like a positive platform. So this video is not going to be super in depth. If I really want to, I could go like super in depth and break down use statistics on all the victims and all that stuff. But it's like I do not have time for that. I mean, even though I'm unemployed, I don't have time for that. Even my unemployed ass doesn't have time for that. Like I literally cannot. One thing that I really like about the series is that it really does mirror the times, and it shows you that the characters are not perfect, and how they talk about victims and cases, the fact that they will debate things, they will disagree, because you're watching them like break down the case. So obviously they're having like different takes on it, going in different areas, following different leads. It evolves with the times and the way that they talk about things, especially in the earlier seasons. The way that they talked about like transgender people was not good, very vile, but very of the times. Even when they were fighting for justice for people, even like in the mid seasons as well, they use characters as a way to almost stand in for segments of the audience that may think about abuse and assault in certain ways, especially Rollins. Amanda Rollins was a character that was introduced in season 13 following the exit of Christopher Maloney as Elliot Stabler. She comes in as a transfer from Georgia. She is exposed to this very like southern male dominated environment as a child, and then you further learn that like her father was like abusive, her mom, her family is a whole mess. It's just the every single episode with Rollins family is an every single episodes with Rollins family members is an amazing episode of television. It's like one of the best episodes of the show. But that really informs the way that she thinks of this stuff. And even though she does fight for victims, she has this bias or blind spot for male authority figures that are in high positions of power. We also learned that she was like assaulted on the job by her boss, and that becomes a big episode. So there's one episode, I can't remember the episode, where it breaks the usual format. So it's in the just in the court where they're testifying, and we'll see in other episodes like the one with Megan Good and stuff, she will kind of give the men the benefit of the doubt when they're like accused of like abusing their wives and stuff like that. So there's those instances that you see with Rollins as it goes forward, and sometimes that is proved right. That episode that had, oh my god, what's his name from Pose in it, where he is falsely accused by two girls of like assaulting, of molesting one of his students because they were jealous that they didn't get to be on like Star Search or something like that. You see her be right there, but in other instances, it can be it's her own bias coming out, and we see through the work that she does in the show, the examples of the cases, especially her confronting her own sexual assault trauma, she shifts her mindset and like gets away from that. And that really is a beautiful thing to see, and a really great example of, characterization and development throughout the 12 seasons that she was on, because she's no longer on the show anymore. She's more like just a guest appearance now. Another example of the show being used as like advocacy, I feel like, is with the Pattern 17 episode. The backstory is that in New York City, Olivia and the team are working on like the fourth example of a rape. And so that follows a very similar thing of like humming, of they're okay. So the backstory of this is like the team is working on trying to find the serial rapist because to their knowledge, the person is on their fourth rape within New York City. They follow a you know, very similar method or basically exact method of like humming to their victims. That's like the one thing I can remember that they did to all of them. But then Rollins, because she's not from New York and she transferred from Georgia, remembers two cases there where someone had the same MO. So they go to Georgia and they get those case files. And the problem with Georgia is that they were not testing those rape kits. So through testing all these rape kits, they're able to find out that this person has done several different rapes in several different states. And at the end, when Olivia has to testify in front of like the police commissioner board, the conversation of like testing rape kits and the rape kit backlog, which is a very real thing in certain states. Like I remember reading like in North Carolina, like they just tested all of the rape kits last year and some of them were like 10 years old. And like the episode is there to discuss and to encourage the audience to learn more and read more about how it's not being tested and how that can actually prevent victims from getting justice because you can't tie these people together. Like it's just a lack of follow through and care when it comes to trying to get justice. Obviously, I think that the show does a lot to portray a diverse range of victims and get rid of not only just the perfect victim narrative where someone has to be perfect, they have to report immediately, they have to show considerable struggle, where it's like no, like people freeze up, people know their attacker, people have to take time to process. It's a very hard thing to go through, but it's also like some victims are children, some victims are elderly, some are immigrants, some are men, some are gay, some are all these things. And it not only just explores the different groups that victims can belong to, but also the ways that their identity can impede them from being able to get justice or make it harder because maybe they're concealing something from their family or they're worried about the public perception of that. It's really nice in that way. But then there's also the part of SVU that I feel like it's kind of hard for fans to really discuss, especially in more recent events related to how we look at police, which is the fact that they're all cops. And this is a police procedural show, and it is propaganda. It's my favorite form of propaganda, but it is propaganda. And it's fine having honesty. I think when as the show goes on later on, it can be obvious that they want to have their cake and eat it too because they're very aware of like perception of stuff, but like it still has to portray the team in a good light. So, what is propaganda? Propaganda is related to like propaganda. It is propaganda. It essentially the goal of propaganda is to change the public perception of the police and also crime. Most often it's to dissuade people from having negative opinions of the police and present opposition to the police or just even criticism of police as like unfounded or negative. Yeah, it's just to dissuade people from having an anti-police standpoint. So the overarching example or just like the fuller proof of like SVU's propaganda is because it presents the police and especially the special victims unit in New York as better than it is. I think in the show, because it's a TV show and it has to give resolution, obviously it cannot be 100% mimetic. If it was mimetic, no one would ever really watch it. And when I use mimetic, it's like when art replicates real life. In real life, a lot of rape cases don't go to trial. In real life, majority of rapists are found not guilty. But in the show, there are a lot more guilty verdicts. Almost everything goes to trial. Like, and it has to be that way to make it a successful television show because it's also following the same structure as Law and Order. So I understand that part. And obviously, you don't want a show about special victims where the police don't do anything. There are episodes where victims don't fully get justice. People are found not guilty or their thing doesn't go to trial because of politics, because of things with the DA's office, because of just circumstances. Like, it doesn't just represent it 100% of the time as fully positive. But in real life, the real life Manhattan Special Victims Unit, or just New York Special Victims Unit, has been investigated in 2022 for gender biased policing and re traumatizing victims through their investigations, which is a stark contrast from Olivia Benson and all the other detectives there. So that's unfortunate. Um, yeah, I don't really know much to say on that because I wasn't able to find more articles on like what the resolution to that investigation was, whether or not it was like more training or whatever. Hopefully things have changed in the 2 years since that investigation, but we will see. Yeah. I think when we look at SVU as a piece of propaganda and also the ways that they support certain things in the writing, I want to specifically focus on episodes that deal with like race relations and police brutality because that is such a contentious topic and relevant topic, especially now, and has been for over a decade. But specifically in how the characters, even in the episodes where police brutality isn't the forefront, that is how the behaviors that these characters take on is justified because they are police officers and they are the heroes and the protagonist of the series. So the actions they do, essentially the show is telling us the ends justify the means. But when this is a media that depicts, police officers and members who actually do have power in our communities, it can kind of influence us, the audience, to project those ideas outside of just a television landscape and think that, well, as long as you're getting the bad guy, it's totally fine if you violate civil liberties, if you engage in police brutality. So speaking of police brutality, the Elliot Stabler of it all, it's almost like a joke within the fandom because Elliot Stabler, who was a main character from seasons 1 to 12, and now he's kind of recurring since season 21 because he has his own show called Organized Crime. I don't watch that. Okay. But there's a lot of crossover episodes between Law and Order SVU and Law and Order Organized Crime. And his character has always been hot tempered, very passionate about the job, aggressive, and anger issues. And a lot of those anger issues are understandable because he feels the cases very deeply, especially the ones that remind him of his own family and sometimes involve them. So he gets very angry at suspects and will rough them up. The problem is that, like, as the audience, we're supposed to think it's good when he loses his temper and, like, is physically violent to a suspect or a criminal. And I want to include the fact that, like, technically police brutality is wrong. Well, not technically, but like, it's wrong regardless if the person is guilty or not, because that behavior should not be normalized, because then it gets applied to people who are not guilty, and you don't want to, you shouldn't pick and choose whose rights you can be, whose rights deserve to be violated and things like that, or who deserves to have power be used against them. But like, as a police officer assaulting a suspect, if the suspect defends themselves, they can be prosecuted for, assaulting a police officer. And that can actually get higher charges than just assaulting someone. So it's things like that. And also the fact that, like, sometimes they'll do it to people who are suspects or even people who are just like terrible people. And it's like, that's not normal behavior. That's not part of normal police stuff. And then also, like, in the show and to all of the like Law and Order shows, the minute someone like asks for a lawyer, then it's like they're seen as like, oh, automatically guilty, because there's like this idea that like innocent people don't need lawyers, and that like invoking your own right to have a lawyer is counterintuitive to the police, to the goal of the police officers and their quest for justice or whatever. Like, you are like obstructing in a certain way when you really aren't, or that it's wrong to consider your own rights when, they're in the middle of an investigation. But on to what I really want to discuss. I initially was going to discuss, so as I talk about race relations in Law and Order SVU and police brutality and how it is like a piece of propaganda, even though it's like my favorite propaganda, I wanted to look at specifically 3 episodes from the latter half of the show to discuss them, the significance of certain things, and what that really reveals about like Law and Order SVU. So the 3 episodes that I'm going to be talking about are American Tragedy, Community Policing, and Guardians and Gladiators. So let's begin.
These are their stories.
American Tragedy is the 3rd episode of the 15th season. It starts with the squad trying to find a rapist who is targeting middle-aged white women in the Upper West Side. The suspect is described as a black man by the victims. This leads the team to perform a stop and frisk operation in the area. While they are performing this, it goes awry because 16-year-old Makad Carter is shot and killed by celebrity chef Jolene Castile. Jolene defends it as it's like Jolene defends her shooting to say that it was self-defense and that he was coming towards her. This episode is very obviously inspired by Trayvon Martin's murder by George Zimmerman and also the Paula Deen racism scandal. So it's later revealed that like Makad was not the rapist. And they do find the actual rapist, but because of like pressures from the community and the DA's office, Barba decides to press charges. I'm pretty sure it was like manslaughter or murder too against Joanne, and the team supports this, and then she is later acquitted, even though evidence proves that like he was not as close to her as she was making it seem. So she was lying about that. I found this episode very significant because this is the introduction to Reverend Curtis. He serves almost like in the realm of like antagonistic figures in the same way that like Ed Tucker is an antagonistic figure to the team because of the way that he incites the public against the squad to kind of pressure them to charge people, investigate people, even though his ultimate goal is justice. It seemed like it's seen as antagonistic because his focus is related to black people and like minorities in large, because he also does cases outside of the black community and advocating for those people. But yeah, it's seen as different and more antagonistic than Sister Anne was and how she related to the squad. But yeah, he could have his own separate video. This episode I wanted to mention because the squad supports this when it is a killing of an unarmed, innocent person by a civilian. Pressing charges is completely supported. That's totally fine. And also this episode will come back later in reference.
These are their stories.
Next up, we have Community Policing, which is the 5th episode of season 17. This begins after an attack by the push-in rapist, who, what we learn, has had a series of rapes where he pushes women in and then assaults them. The particular case that we start off with, he assaulted literally everyone in the family, including the 12-year-old daughter. So everyone is on edge. Everyone wants to find him. The rapist again is described as black, and the initial family that he attacked was white, but I'm not sure about the family, the other victims' races. But anyways, and this case is especially heightened because one of the victims is related to a police officer, so it's seen as like brother officer, type thing, like it's one of their own being targeted. Due to understaffing, Benson has to use police officers from a different unit, and they start a canvass of the area. Most of the residents in this area are black, and they are like largely seen as hostile to the police. One person, when the police came up to him, was like, "Stop and frisk is over," and then Finn replies, "Well, stop and shut up isn't." And they're just asking him if they've seen like someone who matches the police sketch of the perpetrator. With the help of one person, they give the description that the suspected rapist is wearing a jersey with the number 23 on it. And then when they go into a bodega, a person with that same description was trying to take money off of like a card that they stole from the victim, so they know that he's close. And then eventually we see 3 officers, not from our squad, but from the squad or unit that is there to supplement the understaffing with Benson's team, chasing the person. We then later see the 3 officers who were in the chase shoot and kill him. So once they arrive to like the front of the apartment building where the shooting has happened, they're like, oh my God, we got him. So like they need to follow police procedure when there is a shooting. So like the officers' guns have to be taken. They have to wait to give their statement. They look for the gun and they do not find a gun. And then the residents of the area start heckling them. Okay, I forgot her name, but the female detective who was involved with the shooting responds that, oh, well, he raped a 12-year-old. And then Benson's like, girl, like, stop, shut the hell up. All of them are like, all of these people are like super quick to defend themselves because they're like still in like the heat of the moment. And also the fact that they feel so confident in the fact that he had a gun, but like they don't find a gun. There's a crowd outside. Benson tells Finn to like collect everyone's phone and confiscate it because they didn't want that like media thing. And then she tells Carisi to go in there and search his apartment despite them not having a warrant, and to make up an excuse that they need to find like probable cause and use that after the fact to like excuse the fact that they're technically doing an illegal search, because she says that we need to tie him to these rapes, which I understand, but like, girl, what is happening to due process here? Then we cut to like the IAB interviews, and like all of them use the like dictionary definition of reasonable use of force, which leads Ed Tucker to be like, y'all are so coached, okay? And especially when Detective Dumas says that like when he is questioned about why he only shot 3 times versus the other two who entered their clip, and he's like, well, I didn't see him close enough to assess the threat. But then Ed Tucker's like, oh, but you were able to see that he had a gun. So then, they just defend themselves with the fact that, well, I felt like my life and the life of my fellow officers were in danger, so that's why. So Reverend Curtis is then with the family, and there are protests, and they want to pressure everyone for an indictment of the officers. And also, there is a political pressure of Barbara to do that as well. When Liv and them have that conversation about the political, like, pushing for Barbara to indictment, Liv is shocked by Barbara seemingly wanting to go with it. And she's like, "Oh, so you push for an indictment even though these 3 officers were just doing their jobs?" And then when the deputy commissioner of the NYPD comes in, he actually, kind of agrees with Olivia even though she's already walked out. And he wants them to be cleared by Barbara. The cops are suspended. But they view themselves as sacrifices for City Hall. But when Rollins is talking to Dumas, he basically says that he was guilty of something. Why else was he running? Interesting there. Interesting there. Even though I guess the phones were confiscated, people did get footage of the shooting that happened, and then they see the angle, and it's like, oh my God, it's actually really bad. And despite the footage, Olivia is still defending the cops. And she just like, any cop would do this. And then Barbara's like, even you? And she defends it like, well, they didn't have the angle that the video was having. It was dark. He was running. They thought he had a gun. And then she even says that it was the projects. What does that have to do with anything? At the grand jury, Barbara questions her by discussing how many cases she has where she has chased a suspect, how many cases where she has felt like endangered, and yet out of those cases, she's only ever fired her gun twice in over a 10-year career. So it's like interesting that she's like defending this. He questions if the police could have waited, and then eventually they are all indicted. In fact, it seems like the grand jury was agreeing with him and actually wanted more charges and stuff like that. They all get indicted. They all are indicted, but there really is no like resolution to this episode because we don't know what happens if they are ever like gone to trial, what happens. We do know that like I have seen like the female detective in further episodes, so obviously she kept her job. But the episode then ends to them in the bar when they're talking about the indictment of them with news that a rookie cop was killed by a subject because he waited to pull out his weapon. Okay. This is my main problem with that episode, is that it positions those two things as similar and it equivocates them. And it essentially does defend the actions of police officers when it comes to like police brutality. It like it does make it seem like shooting an unarmed person is totally justified in that pursuit. And then it makes it seem as though police are also in danger of dying when those are different. There's a big difference between someone who is a civilian killed by the police in a shooting because you match the description of a suspect and you're innocent anyway, and a police officer dying in the line of duty. A police officer chooses that career, takes on that risk, and like it's not the same. Those are not the same. I don't think that civilians dying should be normalized as just like a risk that happens in the quest for justice. That's crazy. Additionally, making it seem as though these are just the same when there are consequences when someone kills a police officer. There are not always consequences when a police officer kills a person. Again, and when we even look at it number wise, in 2023 there were like 10 times more people shot and killed by the police than there were police officers who died in the line of duty. Like, these are not similar in any way. So to position it as such, to position it like, oh my god, when we pressure police officers to like hesitate, they can be at danger of dying. Oh my gosh. Like, that is very crazy of the writers. I can't lie, that's crazy.
Special Victims Unit. These are their stories.
Now, lastly, we have Guardians and Gladiators, which is the first episode of season 22. This episode begins with phone footage between of a hostile interaction with a white woman and a black man, obviously taking inspiration from the Central Park Karen stuff. She is accusing him of like harassing her and her son, and then the police come, and then later on they discover a body literally right there, so they like automatically assume that he had something to do with it. He then is like under arrest for outstanding warrants that are later like related to like protesting and breaking curfew during like COVID. And then Finn, when they arrive to the scene, the police officers that arrest him have nothing to do with the SVU squad. They're just like local police. But then when SVU arrives to the scene because the victim was like assaulted, Finn literally tells Olivia that like, we are profiling this man. This is racial profiling. And she thinks that this will be worse, that the situation will just be worse given the fact that there's already a crowd forming recording stuff. Eric, who is the victim, his mother wants to know then, because the video blows up, if it was the black man in the video that did this, which shows already how much that video is spread and how all those things are getting tied together and the influence that will later have on this man's life. So the man, Javon, is cleared of the crime because he was able to prove that he got off of work and then went on to an AA meeting before he got to the park, so he had an alibi, but he doesn't want that to get out because he's worried about being fired. Or not an AA meeting, an NA meeting, Narcotics Anonymous. IAB is involved because Javon is filing suit against the NYPD, and he names Finn and Olivia in his suit. This is like the main crux of the issue. This serves as like the B plot of the episode. Okay, I said Chief McGrath. It's Chief Garland. My bad. But anyways, they are even scolded by Chief McGrath for their handling of it. When Olivia's like, oh, but it was all by the book. He's like, well, girl, it's the book that got us in this part. Mentioning, which is like a reference to like systemic racism and its problematicness in police procedural, where even though the things that they do are technically justified and they are not, like, they're not extrajudicial things, they should be. They are still problematic. Then later on, Chief McGrath and Finn have a conversation about them being both black and police officers. They're like, we're black and blue. You are not blue. Blue is not a fucking person. Like, please, you can stop being a fucking cop. Like, please, please. I fucking hate that shit. But anyways, Finn assures, okay, they both acknowledge that the preceding events before SVU even got involved in this case would not have happened if Javon was a white man, because of the woman wouldn't have freaked out on him and the police wouldn't have automatically just believed her and like treated him very suspiciously and profiled him. Well, Garland essentially questions Finn whether or not Olivia is biased in any way, and if that then influenced the way that SVU handled the situation after being involved. Finn says that Olivia's only bias is for victims. And then they continue to have a conversation about like things changing and stuff like that. And then Garland says none of us are safe in relation to backlash, sometimes good or otherwise. Again, watching it is very hard because they're presenting it as if these are like equal footing, like when we're having conversations about like police brutality and stuff, as if it's like equal consequences, but it's like you're gonna lose your job, and at the like the worst thing that can happen to them is that they lose their job and maybe go to jail. The worst thing that happen to a civilian is that you die. Like these are not the same thing, and like making it seem like, oh, them going to IAB and that they potentially could lose their job, like it's so hard to care. I'm sorry, like it's so hard to care. Like obviously I don't want Olivia to lose her job, and no one loses their job. Nothing really comes from this, but it's just really hard to make it seem like the way that the language in the episode presents it as if they are victims of a crusade, almost as if they're being targeted when nothing of the sort is happening. So then we continue on to the IAB interview. Benson defends her squad's actions, and it is discovered that Javon was part of the stop and frisk operation in the 13th season's episode American Tragedy. Check the connection. Benson defends that by saying that he must have fit the profile. Captain Curry, who's the person doing her IAB interview, asked what profile did Javon meet this time, and why didn't Benson interrogate the white woman who made that false accusation against him? She then stops the interview to tell Benson that while she is a well-intentioned person, she still is complicit in the NYPD systemic racism. And she pushes her to reflect on her own bias. Then, when Olivia is finished with the interview, she's in this car with Chief Garland and they have a discussion. And she does come to the conclusion that desire to help victims has blinded her in a way where she does not see her peripheral bias sometimes to people who are suspects. Okay, in this conversation, then Garland says to her that like the outrage is like a freight train coming, which to me it's just like it still presents that like outrage against the police is like unwarranted in a way, which is still like shows that the show, despite this like change in how it depicts police brutality and has these conversations, still kind of has this like foundational idea that like maybe a certain level of police, a level of community outrage is kind of unwarranted to the police, or like makes it seem like these issues are so big we shouldn't just like focus on the police. Like when we're at the grand jury itself questions Finn about arresting Javon, showing a mistrust of the police, but it is positioned as an impediment to justice for Eric. When the perpetrator is found, he's able to manipulate the grand jury into not being indicted. So it just, and at home, Noah asked Olivia if she's racist. I'll be honest, I really laughed when this happened. This was so funny. And he says that like if you do something wrong you should apologize. So she meets Javon in the park and he reveals that he did lose his job because of all of this, and that he doesn't really want the apology, that he's like not accepting the apology, and there really is no resolution. Eric does not get justice. His family even says that like, oh, so if you didn't like arrest that guy, like my brother would get justice, because the victim Eric, like we leave him like in a coma. Like it's unclear if he's ever going to wake up again because of the assault. The perpetrator just gets scot-free, and it is represented as both that yes, policing should change and there should not be racial profiling, but the apprehensiveness of the audience to the police is presented as an impediment to justice, when it's not necessarily the responsibility of the civilians to get justice in the criminal justice system. That's on other people. So it's presented like it's still like in a, oh, you should like trust the police, even though it would make sense for them to be like, well, you arrested someone and it was the wrong person and da 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 this another person and da 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 this. No, I forgot to like script a conclusion, so we're just gonna like freeball this right now. I think the reason I wanted to show these episodes is that Law and Order SVU, when it comes to civilians killing unarmed civilians, they have no problem tackling the racist actions of that. But when it comes to looking at systemic racism within the NYPD, it will always, in a way, wrap itself in that like thin blue line of still wanting us to obey the police and view them as knowing what's best when it comes to justice, when that's not always clear. And even though the show has had episodes where like police officers will be perpetrators and it will get into that, it definitely seems that when it comes to like Black Lives Matter and those elements, and especially race relationships when it comes to like black people, it's very hit or miss, more like miss. It just it seems like the show wants to have its cake and eat it too, where it wants to be able to engage in these conversations and integrate real life things and politics and how we talk about stuff, like conversations into the show, and have characters like Olivia Benson that are very progressive and all these other characters and stuff, but then also maintain a still pro police thing. And especially when we're having these conversations about police brutality of all things and like lives matter conversations, that really is not really possible. It's not really possible because sometimes you can't really have both. You got to give one or the other. And I think that the show would rather retain upholding the like image of the police and making it seem like the characters are really justified and the ends justify the means than have that really hard conversation. I think, in conclusion, while Olivia Benson is not a Trump supporter, she is a cop. She is a fucking cop. And you we gonna be shocked that the cop is gonna endorse Kamala Harris? Are we gonna be shocked? Like, while she may not be, the show may not be like Republican, but it's still pro police. Like, you can be pro police and not supposed to be Republican. And a lot of liberals are pro police. Like, she may not be a conservative, but she 100% is a cop with a capital C. Okay? So, done done. Again, my name is Anastasia. You can follow me on these different social media platforms. You can follow me on these like varied. So I'm going to have the link in the description of this video for Waleed and his family. If you can donate as much as you can, share it as much as you can so that they can fast, so they can achieve their goal quicker. That would help so much. Thank you for watching, and bye.